Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies, coming from ACEC National Headquarters. I'm Jeff Urbanchuk, and welcome to the program. Today, we're going to be focusing in on the new Q1 2023 Engineering Business Sentiment Study that's just been released by the ACEC Research Institute. But before that, just want to kind of make a plug here because convention registration is now open for our 2023 Spring Convention and Legislative Summit. It's going to take place in Washington, D.C. from June 11th through the 14th. And this is a great event. It's our annual event. The Hill is back up and alive. The restrictions are gone, which means our Advocacy Day is back. We're going to be celebrating engineering with our Engineering Excellence Awards to cap off the event. And then leading into the event, we have some fantastic speakers, including the former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie speaking at the program, and a packed schedule of all the stuff that you expect from our marquee event in Washington, D.C. So go up to acec.org, and you're going to see on our hero image right there on the website the link to click to register for the event. Registration's now open. Act quickly now because space is, of course, limited. So back to the program at hand and the sentiment study. And to talk about this, I'm very pleased to be joined by Joe Bates with the ACEC Research Institute. And Joe, thanks again for being on the program. And give us a rundown for those who might not be familiar with the sentiment study, what the objective is and how it's kind of developed.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. It's good to be here again. The sentiment study itself is a survey of about 600 ACEC member firm executives every quarter. It's a really large number of people in the industry, from small to large firms all across the U.S. And the purpose is to understand exactly what the title suggests, sentiment. We know that by understanding where people think the economy's headed, where people think their firm finances are headed, where the industry is headed, is really important information so that we all within the industry can get a better sense of where business is headed and what maybe we should and maybe we shouldn't be doing right now for our own firms.
Over the past quarters that we've seen, I mean, the overall resounding message from quarter to quarter to quarter, even through the economic downturn, the threats of inflation and the like, there's been a pretty optimistic picture painted about the engineering industry. How's it looking for Q1 for this year? How's the year starting off on optimism?
Yeah, so you make a good point. We have seen the sentiment regarding the U.S. economy as a whole. It took a pretty good nosedive at the last half of last year. And the good news is that it's recovering now. It's starting to recover. So we use a net rating system. We take the percent of positive responses and subtract the percent of negative responses. So you can have a total of a plus 100, which would mean everybody is positive about whatever metric we're talking about. Or you could have a negative 100, which would mean everybody is negative. So the sentiment regarding the U.S. economy, it bottomed out at a negative 15 in the third quarter of last year, but has been climbing ever since. And we saw another increase of 12 points. So we're at a positive 12 right now in the first quarter. So that's the good news. But what's really interesting is you go back a year and a half and you look at sentiment regarding firm finances and sentiment regarding the industry as a whole, and it has held steady at a very, very strong plus 80 or higher. You just can't get much higher than that. So a lot of factors are at play there, but most importantly, the IIJA is really helping to bolster the industry.
Yeah, that seems to be a constant drumbeat throughout the recent reports, is that injection of financing through the IIJA has been a good backstop to ease concerns, even when we saw inflationary pressures kind of hit their peak. When it comes to inflation, it's not really being talked a lot as much now in the general media, but by no means are we back to free money. Where are firm executives? How elastic are they to pressures on inflation?
Yeah, so we saw inflation concerns peak in the second quarter of last year. And that was interesting because it actually came 2 months before we saw inflation peak. So our metric was a bit of a leading indicator in that area. And as inflation has started to come down since its high in June of last year, we are also seeing sentiment among firm executives regarding inflation easing. It's still pretty high. So sentiment is still a plus 61, and in this case that's bad because it's concern about inflation, but it's down from a plus 85 from the second quarter of last year. So we're definitely moving in the right direction. And one other piece of information, we asked what are your biggest concerns coming into 2023, and recession and inflation have been the top two concerns for quite a few quarters now, but the inflation concerns have lessened a bit to the point where recession is now the number one concern and inflation is now in the number two spot. So still concerning, but it's starting to ease.
Interesting. Now you also look at market sectors, and you look at kind of the market sectors near term, and then you also look at prospective interest by industry leaders on where they may be looking or where they feel confident in potentially investing. What have you found? What's been the change since last quarter?
Well, the good news again is that in nearly all sectors, not all, but nearly all sectors, we are seeing positive movement in the net ratings from quarter to quarter. So for current sentiment, all sectors are still positive. Now, the residential land development and commercial real estate, they are the lowest rated sectors, and they've come down from about a plus 60 or plus 70 to around a plus 30 right now from middle of last year to now. And they fell again in this quarter. But future sentiment for those particular sectors is actually starting to rebound. And while it's overall negative, it's becoming less negative. So there are some sectors that are certainly struggling right now, but we're starting to see the future sentiment turn around in those sectors. And we're still seeing very, very high ratings currently, as well as into the future, for all of those sectors affected by the IIJA: transportation, water, utilities, and the like.
And that's an interesting thing that it's starting to increase. Maybe they know something we don't about the housing market leading into the new year. We'll see what happens. In addition to looking at the markets, I know that the sentiment report also has a good focus on how firms are feeling about their own employee roles and how they're handling hiring. Now we've seen, of course, this crunch with engineering where you have essentially anyone who's an engineer or wants a job can have a job, and we're pretty much near full employment. And the problem is that we have more work than we have engineers to do the work. How are firms feeling about their about job openings right now and their ability to hire on talent?
Yeah, so a couple of things to talk about to put it in context, Jeff, just as you alluded to. The overall unemployment rate in the U.S. hit a record low of 3.4% in January. It hasn't been that low since the 60s. It's just incredible. Anywhere in the economy, if you want a job, you can pretty much have one. But if you look at the recent Bureau of Labor Statistics data for the sectors of the economy that include our sector, it's 2.2% unemployment. It's at more than full employment. It's a labor shortage. And we see this reflected in the sentiment survey itself. 9 out of 10 firms say they have openings. And on average, 1 out of 10 positions at any given firm is not filled right now. That's pretty high. And future hiring intentions are increasing even more. So we have this shortage. We've had a shortage for a while, and firms are saying we anticipate even needing more people in the coming year. So it's not surprising then that among those top concerns coming into 2023, other than the recession concerns and inflation concerns, wage inflation concerns for new hires as well as existing staff. That is at the top of everyone's list right now.
Yeah. Retention, wage inflation, and attracting talent away from other sectors of the economy, and it kind of goes to that kind of bolsters the overall advocacy message to the administration right now that we need a workforce strategy that incentivizes STEM education and getting kids into STEM education early, and then keeping them there, and then attracting them over to engineering instead of other fields that kind of pull away from our sector. So that's some really good actionable data out there. And if anybody's out there looking for information about the employment, the national scene for engineering employment, the states, the average salaries, I'd actually point you back to the Institute, because in addition to the quarterly sentiment reports that they've done, they are doing annual benchmarks of kind of the state of the engineering economy, and it's all available at ACEC Research Institute.org. And essentially what they have is a profile of the engineering and design economy. And essentially you can say that if you want a good paying, stable, high paying job, engineering is the way to go. And a detail state by state exactly where you have more, a greater salary or what have you, and the areas of growth. I know that you, in the sentiment report, you kind of break out the country into sectors, and you're looking at exactly where firms are more optimistic or see growth. In this report, is there one area of the country that's doing better than others when it comes to general optimism?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Jeff, because I've been looking at this data now since we started a year and a half ago, and that regional breakout tends to kind of hop around a little bit, more so than when you look at firm size data, which is a bit more stable and the trends are very evident. But what I've seen in the last 2 quarters is firms in the Northeast are actually they're feeling more optimistic. They're feeling like they're going to be hiring more people. They tend to be in a more optimistic profile overall than firms in the rest of the country. And then conversely, we tend to see firms in the South being a little less optimistic. They're still very optimistic overall, but that's what we're starting to see is some sort of longer term trends. We have seen some recovery and optimism in the West, and that's good news because in the West, they were sort of pretty, I wouldn't say negative, but they were certainly the least positive of all for a little while last year, especially early in the year. But we've started to see that turn around as well now.
So overall, I mean, it looks like a good picture. It looks like the year's kind of starting off on a strong footing for the industry. I really encourage everyone to go up on ACEC Research Institute.org because the sentiment report is available for free. It's a great set of data that allows you to strategically plan how you may want to look at expanding your business or where you're going to invest. And it's unique to our industry. And Joe and the team at the Institute are focused specifically on really getting into the nitty-gritty on the data points that affect the engineering industry. Outside of the sentiment report, which we're talking about today, what else are you working on with the Institute and kind of what's on the horizon?
Well, we're getting ready to do a lot of work, Jeff. We had a planning session at the end of last year, and we're mapping out the roadmap for the coming 2 to 3 years. We are really starting to hit all cylinders right now. So a big initiative we're just now starting to work on is the firm of the future. And we're going to be looking at what does the firm of the future look like in 10 or 20 years when we have sort of a generational turnover of positions, and we want to look at every level of the firm, from HR to finance to operations to the engineers themselves and what tools they'll be using. So this is a really big initiative that we're embarking upon, multi-year. Another thing we're going to be producing this year, so it is imminent, is we're going to be rolling out a DE&I benchmarking platform that any member firm can utilize. They can enter their own firm information and see where they compare to others in the industry. And they're going to be able to filter down to firms their size, firms in their location, and a lot of other types of filters will be useful to really zero in on comparing yourself to others with respect to DE&I.
That's great. I mean, that's the one thing that I think that the Institute's done a fantastic job of over the time where it's been working towards benchmarking, because it's something that we really haven't had in the past, is that we've had kind of general ideas about size and scope or economic impact or, to your most recent example that you're working on with the DEI benchmarking, is to be able to come out and have actual qualitative data to say this is where the industry is, and allow our member firm executives to have a better handle on that larger macro industry outside of just their firm. So that's great to know. Joe, I appreciate the time you've taken. I really encourage everybody to go up and download this report, because it's a great quarterly snapshot of where the industry is at any given time. And thanks again for joining us, Joe.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Always great to see you.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We'll see you next time.